Picture a bride so delicate her bones could snap beneath the weight of her own wedding gown. Her face is powdered to mask the sickness in her skin, her smile fixed as if it might hold her future together. In the next room, courtiers gather, ready to record the most intimate act of her life as evidence for the crown. This isn't love. This is survival. A trial by bed where failure means exile, disgrace, or death. And she is not alone. Across centuries and continents, women born into poisoned bloodlines were forced to endure rituals so invasive, so dangerous, they turned royal bedrooms into prisons. These are the most terrifying bedroom practices of history's most inbred women. Not legend, not rumor, but the dark, documented truths history tried to bury. 1. Bloodlines that turned bedrooms into horror chambers. She entered the bridal chamber not as a bride, but as a political sacrifice. Her face bore the pallor of sickness, her limbs thin and twisted from generations of intermarriage, yet none of that mattered. The court had gathered outside her bedchamber, whispering prayers not for her happiness, but for proof that the royal bloodline, already poisoned by centuries of inbreeding, could still produce an heir. Inside, the bed was not hers, it was the crown's. The marriage was not about love. It was a treaty sealed in flesh. The attendants, hand-picked by the king, stood like statues in the candlelight, ready to witness every movement. There was no veil of privacy, no sanctuary from the politics that had ruled her life since birth. Her body, fragile from the very genetic web the dynasty worshipped, was now an instrument of statecraft. Every sigh, every shiver, every stain on the linen would be scrutinized as evidence, not of passion, but of power. This was not an isolated cruelty. Across courts from Spain to the Habsburg Empire, women bred within their own bloodlines were subjected to the same ceremonial humiliations. Some barely survived the night. Others never rose from the sheets at all. In palaces where portraits masked deformities and poets wrote of divine beauty, the truth lay behind locked doors. These bedrooms were silent battlefields where life, death, and empire hinged on a single performance. What you are about to read is not drawn from whispered gossip or salacious rumor. It comes from letters, court records, and eyewitness accounts that lay bare the reality behind royal walls. For history's most inbred women, the wedding night was not the beginning of a love story. It was the opening act in a ritual of survival, humiliation, and sometimes execution. 2. The curse of the bloodline. Why inbreeding was deliberate. In the palaces of Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, the most dangerous disease was not plague or famine. It was the obsession with purity. Royal families believed their power came from divine blood, and that letting it mingle with common veins would dilute the right to rule. The solution was as ruthless as it was short-sighted. Marry your own. Brothers to nieces, uncles to granddaughters, cousins so closely related their family trees were tangled knots. Every wedding was a contract to keep the crown's blood sealed inside the palace walls. The price was written into the bodies of their daughters, jaws that jutted grotesquely forward, skulls misshapen from birth, limbs so frail they fractured under the weight of a gown. Some could barely walk without pain, yet were expected to endure pregnancies year after year. Others bore the telltale signs of genetic collapse, infertility, epilepsy, and illnesses that modern medicine now recognizes as the inevitable legacy of close kin unions. None of it mattered to the dynasties that bred them. A princess was first and foremost a vessel, a living vault meant to guard the family's sacred blood while producing heirs. Her health was secondary, her will was irrelevant. From the moment she could stand, her future was planned not by her heart, but by the needs of the throne. This was not ignorance. Royal genealogists tracked family lines with precision, knowing full well they were marrying cousins who shared more blood than strangers ever should. they did it anyway, believing the risk worth the reward. What emerged were women born into a curse, their bodies shaped by centuries of calculated unions, yet still thrust into bedrooms where their lineage, however damaged, was the only currency that mattered. Third, wedding night spectacle. When privacy was forbidden for many royal brides, the wedding night was not a moment of intimacy. It was a performance staged for the survival of dynasties. In courts obsessed with securing heirs, privacy was a luxury no queen could afford. The marriage bed became a public stage where the act of consummation was proof of political success. In some traditions, attendants stood at the edge of the chamber, instructed to watch and later testify that the union had been physically sealed. Others waited outside the door, listening for sounds that would confirm the act had taken place. In certain courts, bloodied sheets were carried out and displayed like trophies, paraded before courtiers to announce that the bride's virginity was intact and the contract fulfilled. For inbred brides, many weakened by frail health, deformities, or chronic pain, this was not only humiliating but often dangerous. Failure was catastrophic. If a bride could not endure the ritual, or if witnesses doubted her ability to conceive, annulment was swift. Her name might be dragged through court gossip, branded barren before she ever had the chance to bear a child. In some cases, she was exiled to a remote estate, stripped of titles and influence. For the groom, a failed wedding night could damage alliances. For the bride, it could end her life at court entirely. These spectacles were never about love or passion. They were transactions, political bonds forged in the most intimate of settings and verified by strangers. The bride's comfort was irrelevant. Her consent was assumed. The moment she crossed the threshold, she ceased to be a woman and became an asset, her body scrutinized not for beauty or desire, but for its ability to prove, in one night, that the bloodline could survive another generation. The heir factory. Relentless pregnancies, despite deadly risks. Once the wedding night was declared a success, a royal bride's life shifted to a single, relentless mission: produce heirs, inbred queens and princesses, already burdened with fragile health, were pushed into cycle after cycle of pregnancy as if their bodies were state-owned machines. The throne did not care if each birth left them weaker. The survival of the dynasty outweighed the survival of the woman. For many, the results were devastatingly predictable. Miscarriages became routine, stillbirths heartbreakingly common. Infants often died within days, their tiny bodies bearing the same genetic weaknesses as their mothers. Yet no failure excused a queen from her duty. The moment she recovered from one ordeal, the court demanded she prepare for the next. Bedrooms turned into medical battlegrounds. Midwives, physicians, and attendants moved in and out with the precision of a military campaign, tracking ovulation, timing intercourse, and prescribing remedies that ranged from herbal tonics to dangerous concoctions of lead or mercury. Some women were bled to balance humors before conception. Others were subjected to invasive procedures meant to open the womb. Every pregnancy was a gamble, but there was no opting out. A queen who could not produce a living heir risked political ruin, annulment, or replacement. Some died in childbirth before reaching 30, their bodies worn beyond recovery. Others lived on, pale and sickly, treated as breeding stock until menopause ended their usefulness. Behind the palace walls, the public saw portraits of glowing mothers cradling perfect children. Propaganda hiding the truth. The real story was one of women trapped in gilded cages, forced to gamble their lives again and again in the hope that one child might survive long enough to wear the crown. In the eyes of the court, every risk, every death was simply the cost of keeping the bloodline alive. 5. Forced fertility treatments. Early and dangerous. Science. When repeated pregnancies failed, the royal solution was not mercy. it was intervention. Inbred queens and princesses, already weakened by years of miscarriages and illness, became subjects of crude fertility experiments disguised as medical care. The court called it science. In reality, it was desperation wrapped in superstition. Physicians prescribed tonics laced with mercury, lead, or arsenic, believing these poisons could purify the womb. Women drank these mixtures daily, unaware that each dose was slowly destroying their nervous systems. Others were made to inhale fumes from burning herbs mixed with animal parts, rituals meant to awaken fertility through heat and scent. Some treatments crossed into ritualized abuse. Midwives and court healers claimed that lying with a proven fertile male relative, often a cousin or uncle, could transfer virility through bloodlines. Inbred women, too ill to protest and bound by duty, were ordered to comply. This was framed as a sacred act to save the dynasty, even as it deepened the very genetic curse it sought to fix. There were also invasive physical procedures. Metal instruments, barely sanitized, were inserted to clear blockages or widen the passage for conception. These left women in agony, sometimes causing permanent injury or fatal infection. Failure did not end the treatments. It escalated them. Each miscarriage was met with stronger doses, harsher rituals, and more humiliating inspections. The woman's comfort, dignity, and safety were never part of the equation. Her body was a political tool, and every failed attempt to produce an heir was treated as a problem to be solved at any cost. In the end, these so-called cures often hastened death rather than prevented it, silencing women who were already trapped in a cycle where survival mattered less than the survival of a name. 6. The bed as a courtroom. Sexual performance as political evidence. In the world of dynasties, a queen's bedroom was not private. It was a courtroom, and her body the only witness that mattered. For inbred noblewomen, every act behind closed doors could decide the fate of treaties, titles, and entire kingdoms. Sexual performance was treated not as intimacy, but as evidence, scrutinized with the same gravity as a signed treaty. On the morning after a wedding night, attendants examined the sheets for blood, parading them before courtiers as proof of virginity and consummation. These linens could be preserved for decades, stored like legal documents to be produced if the marriage was ever challenged. If no blood was found, accusations of impurity could erupt instantly, threatening annulment or political disgrace. In some courts, eyewitnesses were required. Trusted noblewomen or physicians stationed within earshot, sometimes within sight, to confirm the act had taken place. Their testimony could strengthen a diplomatic alliance or destroy it. For inbred brides, whose fragile health often made intercourse painful or impossible, this scrutiny was not just humiliating, but dangerous. When doubts arose, invasive medical examinations were ordered. Court-appointed doctors inspected the queen's body for signs of consummation or fertility, their findings carrying the weight of law. A favorable report could protect her position. An unfavorable one could exile her from court. These rituals were designed to protect dynastic interests, not the women themselves. Their ability to perform was measured in political value, not personal well-being. A successful knight secured alliances, ensured succession, and reinforced the purity of the bloodline. A failed one could dissolve a marriage, shift borders, and ruin reputations. In such a system, the bed was never a place of rest. It was a tribunal where verdicts were delivered in whispers, and a woman's entire future hinged on what others claimed she did, or did not, do between the sheets. 7th, bedroom spies. Servants, confessors, and midwives as informants for inbred queens and princesses. The walls of the bedchamber did not keep secrets. Every night, eyes and ears were planted in the shadows. Servants instructed to watch, midwives to examine, confessors to listen, all ready to carry reports to those in power. Privacy was an illusion. The bedroom was an intelligence network. Ladies-in-waiting, sworn to loyalty, often served as the first layer of surveillance. They prepared the bed, dressed the bride, and lingered nearby under the guise of assistants, noting every whisper, every hesitation. Their accounts traveled quickly, often reaching the king or his advisors before dawn. Midwives, ostensibly there for medical care, doubled as official inspectors. After wedding nights, they examined the bride for signs of consummation, reporting not just the presence of blood, but the manner of the act, the bride's physical condition, even her emotional state. These intimate details could strengthen a queen's position or be weaponized against her. Confessors, trusted with the sanctity of the soul, became conduits for political intelligence. Under the seal of confession, they coaxed noblewomen into revealing fears, failures, or reluctance, only to relay those confessions to bishops, cardinals, or even rival courts. What should have been sacred became strategic. In some cases, foreign ambassadors bribed palace staff for information, turning servants into double agents. A queen's fertility cycle, her health, or her willingness to perform could become diplomatic currency. Nothing was too small to report. A fainting spell, an overheard argument, even the way a queen walked the morning after could spark rumors that shifted alliances. In such a climate, trust was impossible. Every touch, every glance, every breath taken in the royal bed was recorded, analyzed, and sent up the chain of power. Proof that in a royal court, the most dangerous enemies often stood at the foot of the bed. 8. Rituals of purity, religious practices that doubled as control. In the courts of history's most inbred dynasties, religion was not only a matter of faith, it was a mechanism of control. For queens and princesses, intimate life was regulated by elaborate purity rituals, dictated by priests and enforced by male relatives. These ceremonies claimed to honor God, but often served to monitor, restrict, and dominate a woman's private existence. Before a royal bride could share a bed with her husband, she might be summoned to a cleansing rite. Surrounded by clergy, she would bathe in scented water, blessed with holy relics, her body examined under the guise of ensuring spiritual readiness. These inspections were rarely symbolic. Priests or appointed matrons would check for signs of virginity or fertility, claiming their findings were divine revelations. Once married, her intimate schedule was no longer her own. Church law, interpreted by male advisors, dictated which nights were pure enough for marital relations. Religious calendars marked certain feast days, fasting periods, and menstrual cycles as off-limits. Compliance was monitored closely, not for her spiritual benefit, but to control the timing of conception and maintain the image of moral piety. After childbirth or miscarriage, purification ceremonies were mandatory before she could return to the marriage bed. Officially, they symbolized renewal. In practice, they allowed clergy and attendants to inspect her body, assess her readiness for another pregnancy, and report back to the court. These rituals blurred the line between blessing and intrusion. They reinforced the idea that her body belonged not to herself, but to the dynasty and the church. Every prayer, every drop of holy water, every whispered scripture was part of a system that cloaked surveillance in sanctity, ensuring that divine authority and political control shared the same bed. 9. Medical exploitation. When doctors became power brokers. In royal courts, physicians were not just healers, they were political gatekeepers. For inbred queens and princesses, the doctor's verdict could decide everything from their right to remain queen to the fate of entire alliances. A single diagnosis could determine whether she was declared fertile, fit for childbirth, or quietly removed from duty. These court physicians wielded power far beyond medicine. Some were loyal to the queen, others to the king, and many to whichever faction paid them best. Their examinations went far deeper than health checks, often crossing into invasive procedures that the patient could not refuse. Under the pretext of care, they inspected for signs of fertility, sometimes in full view of attendants, reducing the queen's dignity to a medical curiosity. For women weakened by years of inbreeding, these examinations were more than humiliating. They were dangerous. Doctors experimented freely, trying herbal infusions, metal instruments, and chemical compounds in the name of improving fertility. Some methods left lasting damage. Others hastened death. Consent was never considered. Medical reports became weapons in court politics. A physician could declare a queen barren to justify annulment, or pronounce her in excellent health to keep her in place despite visible illness. False records were traded like currency, their conclusions tailored to benefit whoever held influence. In some cases, foreign ambassadors bribed royal physicians for information, turning medical files into tools of espionage. A leaked detail about a missed menstrual cycle or a suspected pregnancy could shift diplomatic negotiations overnight. The queen's life was rarely the priority. She was a patient only in name. In reality, she was an asset whose body was managed, manipulated, and reported on by men who understood that in the politics of bloodlines, a doctor's pen could be as powerful as any crown. The tragic legacy: death, scandal, and genetic collapse. For countless inbred queens and princesses, the end came far sooner than the crown's poets dared to write. Some died in their 20s, worn down by a relentless cycle of pregnancies, miscarriages, and medical abuse. Others survived in name only, exiled to distant estates, stripped of influence after being declared barren or unfit. The luckiest faded quietly. The rest became scandal, their private humiliations whispered through courts as political cautionary tales. Generations of deliberate inbreeding had done its damage. Fragile bones, weak hearts, and inherited disorders passed from mother to child until even the healthiest heirs carried the shadow of collapse. The very bloodlines dynasties fought to preserve became their undoing. In the end, the quest for purity left graves full of women who had never lived freely, their bodies spent in service to a lineage that saw them as vessels, not people. Scandal often outlived them. False accusations of infidelity, whispers of failed wedding nights, and rumors of secret lovers followed their names long after death. Political enemies weaponized these stories, rewriting their legacies to serve factional agendas. In some cases, the truth, the abuse, the forced rituals, the constant surveillance, was buried entirely, replaced by portraits of serene queens who never existed. Yet their history still speaks. The invasive control over their bodies, the erasure of their autonomy, and the willingness to sacrifice their health for political gain echo into the present. The palaces may have changed, but the questions remain. Who decides what a woman's body is for? Who benefits from her compliance? And how much is she allowed to say no? These women's lives were tragedies written in silk and blood. Their legacy is a warning that power without consent turns even the most gilded bedroom into a prison.